You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
You know, we have the chief of staff for President Obama is an old friend of mine and my husband's, and was in the White House when Bill was there, and he said, you know, never waste a good crisis.
Hi, this is Pastor Joe Greenhead, pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you today. You just saw a clip from Rahm Emanuel, and he is actually the mayor of Chicago currently, and he's a former high-ranking official in the Obama and the Clinton administrations, and you hear him use a phrase that says, never let a good crisis go to waste. And many people will interpret this as the fact that the ruling elite have historically caused crises in order to promote their agenda. And as you know, if you've been following the 2019 movement, if you're a subscriber to my YouTube channel, I share a lot of information, and you'll know that all the information that I share is well documented. I use historical documentation, declassified documentation, books, writings from the people that I'm talking about. So I'm not speculating or guessing or giving some wild hypotheses to the things that I'm speaking of. I come from a research background. I do research and I find these things out and I share them with you. So some of the statements I'm going to make may seem controversial at first, but I would just encourage you to have an open mind and listen to what I'm saying, and I will provide you the resources and the proof to back everything up. So if you recall my last video that I produced, I used a term that the globalists use, which is ordo ab chaos, and that's Latin for order out of chaos. So the strategy that they use in order to promote their agenda is order out of chaos. And again, this is in their documentation. They use these in the seal, the very seal of some of their the secret societies that they're a part of. That's the seal with the two-headed eagle and the number 33. You have ordo ab chaos. And so this is what they do. They create crises. They stir up controversy in order to promote a certain agenda. And another term for this is called the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic, and I talk about this in great detail so you can understand the Hegelian dialectic. The ultimate goal, or you know, end game for the globalists is the New World Order, which is a one-world governmental system. And in order to get there, they need to have more government control and less individual liberties. So their goal is a one-world government, which is called the New World Order. It's on the back of your dollar bill, Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means a new world order. That's a one-world government that they're trying to promote. And in order to do that, they need to tighten up government controls, have more control over the masses, and they need to reduce your individual liberties and get you more dependent on the government. I'm going to say that again. So in order for them to get to a one-world government or the New World Order, they have to have more government control, and they do that by getting people more dependent on the government and to take away their individual liberties, or our individual liberties. And so when you understand that that's their end game, and that's what they've said, they've stated that in their writings over and over again, then you start to look at the various strategies as being used. And so the narratives that we see in the news and mainstream media should give you an indicator as to the things that are being promoted for a purpose. These aren't organic things. These aren't just things that are falling into place. You know, if you have watched on the news, you have a lot of these student protests, and this is not a knock on the students, the children, and the school students that are protesting against gun violence. I believe that there's a lot of children that are sincerely afraid, they're confused, and they don't know where to go. But overall, the movement, just like most of these movements, is being orchestrated by the global elite. They're being orchestrated. They're normally very well funded, just like the Black Lives Matter movement, just like the Antifa movement. These are movements that are funded by the globalists, and they're directed behind the scenes by some of the ruling elite. And this is this is the same situation. So, and again, I know that it's very easy for them to kind of promote an agenda when they get children involved. You know, and it was a tragic thing that happened in Florida. I'm not negating that. I'm not negating the fear that would come in that situation. But what I am saying is that, just like Rahm Emanuel stated, is that they never want to let a good crisis go to waste. So in order for them to push their gun control regulations, they want to get rid of the Second Amendment. That's their ultimate goal, because what the Second Amendment does is it gives individuals in America the opportunity to defend themselves. And the only way that they can go against that is by taking away the guns of the people, so that the people they will have no choice but to trust the government in order to protect them. The only way that they will be able to do this, because as long as people are, as long as you have highly armed people that can protect themselves, defend their own personal property and their own lives, then it is nearly impossible for the government to come in and to take control in those situations. And one of the things, just as I go forward, I want to share with you, there were so many discrepancies, and I'm going to share some of those discrepancies. But you see consistently, whether it's the Parkland shooting, whether it was Newtown, whether it was Florida, Las Vegas, there's so many red flags that they state after the fact. So especially with this Florida shooting, we're going to talk about some of them, but there's so many red flags, and consistently you will hear them say, "We dropped the ball. We dropped the ball. This organization dropped the ball." And in this Florida situation, it's about 3 or 4 different organizations that dropped the ball. And I'm using air quotes, they dropped the ball. 9/11, when the planes flew into the World Trade Center, there was so many reports afterwards that they reported suspicious activity by the people that were ultimately accused of the 9/11 attacks. And they would say the FBI dropped the ball, the CIA, the state police, the local police, all these different organizations dropped the ball, but that these same organizations that consistently drop the ball and allow these tragedies to happen are the same ones that are saying you need to get rid of your guns and let us protect you. And, you know, I mean, we have to be smarter than that. We have to understand that the Second Amendment had a specific purpose and a reason behind it by the Founding Fathers, and those reasons haven't changed. People will say the British, they'll say outside forces, etc., etc. But that at the core of the Second Amendment is to fight, to give individuals the right to defend themselves and to resist governmental tyranny. So it's twofold: to defend your personal property and yourself, and to fight against governmental tyranny. And those things are definitely just as valid as they always were. So, but let's get into this a little bit. So we talked about the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is they control both sides of the argument, but they also they cause the crisis and then they offer the solution. I'm going to say that again. They cause a crisis and then they offer a solution. So if you think about the Patriot Act with the 9/11, of course you have all these organizations that supposedly dropped the ball on 9/11, and then they give you the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act takes away your rights, and I'll tell you, just out of personal experience, and most of you probably know this, if you would have went to the airport on September the 9th or September the 10th, 2001, and they would have asked you to take your shoes off and they would have started groping you, there would have probably been a problem. The average person would have resisted. They would have fought. It would have been a problem, right? But September the 12th, 2000, right after the World Trade Center, people were willingly taking off their clothes. They go into that X-ray machine that actually shows you naked underneath your clothes and all these other things. You know, people willingly gave up their rights, and so this is part of the process. So when they want to get rid of your rights, they can allow for a tragedy or crisis to occur, or just simply to take advantage of a crisis that occurs. So the ultimate end goal is a one world governmental system, and along the way of getting there, they want to take away your individual rights and get you to trust the government more. So with that being said, think about this thing with Parkland. What are they doing? They're doing a gun grab. They're trying to have people get rid of their guns. They're trying to put tighter governmental regulations. And that's unnecessary, because the laws that were on the books should have stopped this occurrence. There was so many red flags. There was so many opportunities for law enforcement to have intervened in this situation. They had all the warnings. People over and over again came and said, we tried to warn them. We all knew there was a problem, but yet nothing was done. And so, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. You can either say that they allowed this to happen in order for them to push their agenda, or that maybe some people believe they caused it. Some people believe it's a false flag. Whatever the case being, the ends doesn't justify the means. And what I mean is, what they're trying to suggest now would have nothing to do with this incident or this occurrence. There was, you know, taking away assault rifles is not the answer. Any more than if you had a, you know, if you had, let me think, if you were diabetic, you know, the proper thing would be to take insulin or take pills for diabetes. You know, you wouldn't necessarily take something for, you know, high blood pressure, right? You wouldn't take high blood pressure medicine. You would take medicine to cure your diabetes or to keep your sugar levels in control, right? So what they're suggesting now is something that isn't the answer. You know, if you wanted to stop this Parkland shooting, there were already plenty of laws and regulations and plenty of safeguards to keep this from happening, and we're going to talk about them. It's almost like the same thing when we talk about 9/11. Think about 9/11. They said that Osama bin Laden, who was in Afghanistan, did it, so they went to Iraq. You know, just doesn't make sense.
As you point out, there just seem to be more and more of these occasions where there was a heads up of real serious problems, and yet nothing appears to have been done. All right, so you will remember that Nicholas Cruz lost his mom last November, and that he moved in with another family. Initially, we heard from the Sneed family. They're the ones with whom Nicholas Cruz was living on the day that he carried out the attack on the high school here. And that family has said there was no indication from Nicholas that he was going to carry out this deadly rampage. However, CNN has learned from police documents that we obtained that he lived with another family just prior to living with the Sneed family. Right after his mom died, for a couple of weeks, he was living with another family. And that family has a very different portrayal. They live in Palm Beach County, and they called the authorities a number of times on Nicholas Cruz, specifically about his violent behavior, about the fact that he had guns, and not just that he had guns, that he had threatened with guns, including in one portrayal they said that he had taken a gun and put it up against a person's head. So clearly here you have very strong indications that this young man had a violent temper, he had weapons, and he had threatened to use them in a way that was highly dangerous.
So, you know, this gun grab that they're doing, it really doesn't make sense in regards to the solutions that they're suggesting, you know, and ultimately when you know that their goal is to do away with the Second Amendment if they can, and put tighter stipulations on the average individual citizen of the United States. Again, this march on, you know, it's a knee-jerk reaction, and that's what they're looking for. They're looking for you to just get so emotionally distraught about what's going on that you evacuate all reason, and you just kind of, you know, just have a knee-jerk solution. Let's get rid of all assault rifles, and that's not the answer. Again, there were so many safeguards that was already in place that would have kept this from happening if we just followed the laws that's already on the books. So, and again, I do this video because I want us to have our eyes wide open and for us to understand what's going on and not to fall victim to these strategies that are happening. And we're going to uncover some of the things that are happening. We're going to uncover the mainstream media and how they're complicit in these things. But one of the first things I want to talk to you about it, because I said that what they're doing is they're using our children as political capital. They're actually manipulating our young people, which is something that we should be upset with in you know, just on face value. We should be upset that they manipulate our children in order to gain, you know, to push a political agenda that really hasn't anything to do with this situation, or very little, I should. Our children are being used as political pawns in a battle to attack the Second Amendment. Case in point, this student David Hogg, who is like in the forefront of this. You've seen him on CNN, you've seen him other places, and he's very articulate. He's he's kind of leading the charge, and he's supposed to represent this organic movement of students that are just sick and tired. And some of the catchphrases they use: the next generation is going to carry the torch, they're going to make things happen. And so then they stand in front of Congress, they stand in front of the TV cameras, and they berate the political system and President Trump. It's your fault, the NRA, it's your fault that these things are happening. And it's all just political football. It's smoke and mirrors. It's not a real thing. I mean, I'm not saying that gun violence is not a real thing. I'm not saying that this tragedy wasn't a real thing. But what I'm saying is the solution that they're offering is not a real thing. It's a smoke and mirrors, if you will. It's a bait and switch. It's the Hegelian dialectic. Because what they're doing is their ultimate goal is to get rid of the guns, and so they're using this as one of the tools in order to get there. Now, this young man, David Hogg, he's been featured on CNN and CBS, and following the shooting of course, at the school was Stoneman Douglas High School that left 17 people dead and more than a dozen others injured. Hogg, a student journalist who says he interviewed classmates, and this is how things start to get very, very interesting, if you will. And I'm going to show you a couple of clips. But this young man, Hogg, supposedly who's just a student in the high school, and just spontaneously is moving into this area. It says that he's a student journalist. He was interviewed classmates during the shooting, and he has since become one of the most prominent student voices calling for stricter gun control measures and characterizing the response of politicians and specifically Trump as disgusting. Now, I'm going to show you a video clip of him. Now, keep in mind, many people are reporting that because this was kind of like a staged event, or they knew about it ahead of time, and that this young man, whose father happens to be a retired FBI agent, is basically scripted what he's doing. And so let's look at the clip, and I'll be back to talk a little bit more.
Tonight on social media, right-wing conspiracy theories going viral about David Hogg, a 17-year-old Parkland shooting survivor. The unsubstantiated claims say he's a crisis actor, a trained actor who takes advantage of tragedies for political gain. The conspiracies first surfaced Monday when the fringe website Gateway Pundit posted videos and articles accusing Hogg of memorizing what they call lines when he stumbles on camera.
Actually, that was a bad choice because the janitor... Sorry. Okay, you're fine, David, you're fine.
Adding that Hogg and his fellow students are defending the FBI after it missed warning signs because his father is a retired FBI agent.
It's disgusting that these trolls are out there trying to make this about me and not the people that were murdered.
By Tuesday, the conspiracy went viral on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. The president's son, Donald Trump Jr., liked 2 tweets. Lucian Wintrich, the author of the Gateway Pundit posts, tells NBC News he meant that students are trained actors recruited from the school's drama department.
We can't continue to allow American discourse to be driven by a few voices.
Now only on cue, it's a confrontation that's making waves. A Redondo Beach lifeguard and a teenage boogie boarder get in a heated argument, and it's all caught on video. CBS 2's Andrea Fujii is live in Redondo Beach. Andrea.
Well, Pat, this argument was all about a boogie board that was placed on top of a trash can just like this. It was all caught on video, and tonight that lifeguard is under review.
Don't take this the wrong way, but can you go away?
David Hogg says his 17-year-old friend put his boogie board on this beach trash can. And when a lifeguard asked him to move it, he did. But then the situation took a turn.
He said, I didn't know it was a crime to put your board on the trash can. Because he just didn't want it to get
We had a fire alarm earlier that day, and that was a drill. So we thought this was a drill too, just another one. Because we have a lot of fire alarms, a lot of fire drills at the school. After we heard the first gunshot, we initially thought it was a drill. Actually, that was a bad choice.
It's okay, you're fine.
Actually, that was a bad choice because the janitor... Sorry.
It's okay, you're fine, David, you're fine.
Honestly, when I was going out, I was kind of in... Hold on.
It's okay.
When I was going out, I was in shock.
Yeah, saying I don't know how to put this in perspective. It's okay.
So most of my friends that made it out, one of them went into a bathroom in the same, I believe, in the same hallway as the shooter. Oh, hold on. One of them went into the same bathroom, I believe, as the hallway shooter. He was in there at the same time, and he was in the bathroom, and he didn't know if he was going to live.
I was in my environmental science class when the first gunshot echoed through the hallways. We never had an active shooter drill at my school, and though we did talk about what to do in this type of situation, nothing could have prepared us for this. Politicians, and more importantly, the American public, must take action if we're going to prevent the next shooting. To elected officials, I say this: don't lie to us. Don't make any more false promises, because when you do, children die. For the unfortunate individuals that were at my school, I ask that this be a time of togetherness and something that is going to be always remembered, not only as a terrible incident, but as a turning point in American history, where students speak up and speak out when the politicians won't. I understand the importance of interest groups and how oftentimes they're necessary to continue a political agenda. However, when that agenda involves putting the lives of children at risk, how can you justify that? I support the Second Amendment, but for God's sake, how can we knowingly pass bills and laws that are in direct opposition to saving kids' lives? Sandy Hook, the Pulse nightclub shooting, and Vegas, just to name a few. What legislation was passed in response? The answer to that question is little, if any. This President's Day, I think it's important that we come together as a nation and see each other's viewpoints and respect each other as fellow Americans. But this tragic event must never be forgotten, because once it is, there will be another one, and another one. We need to stand up, go out and vote, talk to your legislators, and get educated. Be persistent, because these interest groups and these politicians will not listen if we don't speak up. So as American citizens, unite and stand up in the face of division, not for any political agenda, but for the lives of millions of school children.
Okay, now let's look at some of the discrepancies or some of the red flags that happened, overall in this.
My name is John Bouchel, and I am not a bot. I was in school administration after spending a stint in the military. I was a teacher, a coach, and later became an administrator. Like most athletic males, I was assigned as part of the school security team. Eventually, I was trained by the Department of Homeland Security, several sheriff's departments, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI. Prior, I was trained in the military. I was a combat crew member and a certified marksman with both rifles, pistols, M16, and .40 caliber Colt. With an oak leaf cluster, multiple awards, I was a likely person to help with school security and had an extensive background in technology and video surveillance as well. I held an SCI security clearance, which is the very highest we have in America. I say these things to help you understand my background and to weigh my opinion as to the events in Parkview, Florida, 30 minutes from my home where I live, now retired from school administration. As an administrator in charge of a large high school of 1,800 students and 140 employees, I held tabletop exercises and wrote publications and helped with multiple school and multi-jurisdictional school systems training as a developer and a presenter. Never did I hear from, receive information from, or was contacted by, read any publications, or gathered statistics from the United States Secret Service. Not once, ever. Yet 3 weeks prior to the shooting in Florida, the United States Secret Service was not only at the school, they held the training.
I talked to one of my teachers. In fact, it was the same teacher that I ended up being with, yesterday when all of this went down. And he said that the Secret Service came and trained them on what the new safety protocols would be.
I have also, despite actually thwarting a school shooting by an armed predator at my school, have never seen, spoke with, or was interviewed or contacted by the FBI or the United States Secret Service. It's worthy to note that the 911 response time was in excess of 20 minutes. In fact, I was only contacted by a few reporters. No reporters ever contacted my students for interviews or opinions. I never spoke to a national law enforcement agent, much less the United States Secret Service. So to hear the FBI were the first responders, only beating CNN by minutes, in a wealthy Florida area saturated with law enforcement, shocked me. Seeing the amazing amount of CNN coverage, so well organized and all espousing one message and only one message, is equally troubling. Seeing a student saying she actually walked with the shooter while evacuating and heard shots shocked me.
You were walking down the hall, he had already fired at that time.
Yes, sir, with him.
Weren't you scared?
In the moment I wasn't, because there was obviously definitely another shooter involved.
So you think there was more than, do you think there was more than one shooter? There's 3 shooters.
Seeing video of a student telling us she was told they would have a drill that day with actors deeply troubles me.
Because they were putting us through drills, and we all thought this was a drill. We thought this was a drill.
No one seemed to be worried at point. People thought that it was just another intense drill. They told us about a drill before where they were going to be shooting blank.
Seeing the same young man over and over who visited CNN that day and whose father is an FBI agent troubles me. Seeing and hearing the same narratives over and over that conflict with every aspect of training and experience I have is extremely unsettling. I saw video interviews of students claiming multiple shooters. This is troubling as well. I realized that the shooter apparently pulled the fire alarm to create chaos and provide a richer target environment. That alarm would have sent a signal to its precise time and location. At least one interview I watched was a student saying her doorknob was rattled, and she heard a voice saying, "Go try another door. This needs exploration." In my utterly qualified expert opinion, there are several troubling facts being dispensed that I refuse to accept. Some of them are: why was the shooter visited 39 times by local law enforcement, but never placed on a watch list? Why was his extensive school discipline not compiled and then presented to the school board for total expulsion from the schools? Why was the FBI first to respond when the school is so close to the police department and an officer with a radio was supposedly on campus? How did CNN have so many kids in place to echo their exact verbiage and focus on the actual weapon and not the shooter? Why isn't the alleged United States Secret Service involvement in a public school being examined? Who is this reoccurring student that has family in the FBI? Why are the interviews that do not agree with the one shooter or the narrative that CNN is pushing being heard? Why aren't the multiple videos available? With the floor plan that I have seen, I would have had approximately 22 cameras in that building, and over 140 in my school. I realize that some of the videos will be used for the trial of the shooter. However, it is in the interest of the public to see some of the unused footage that is available. Why was the United States Secret Service at this school providing training 3 weeks prior? And how was the weakest, sloppiest, and most often not on real location news company all over this son of the FBI agent with an amazing and uncanny ability to find a news camera in multiple states in the last 6 months? Did this infamous teenager actually graduate already? Has the United States Secret Service ever been to any other schools to supervise and provide training for an active shooter situation? How could the United States Secret Service possibly visit all 22,000 high schools in the United States? And how would they be chosen? Who identified this shooter? And how did law enforcement track him to the retail store he was arrested at? Why has the entire CNN narrative been to attack the Second Amendment when at least 3 government institutions, possibly 5 if you count DFACS, failed miserably to help the mentally ill? Why has the school district decided to demolish this building like they did at Sandy Hook if their narrative is true and correct? Why not allow the forensics to be published and to be explored completely? All in all, my professional opinion is this stinks to the high heavens. Either we are surrounded by the most incompetent news people in the world, who don't ask questions or give a damn about these murders, or have no concept of why this happened and will happen again soon. I, for one, am sick to death of the fake news outlets pretending that this is about a rifle. It's not. It's about a mentally ill person, totally abandoned and discarded and politically expediently ignored by multiple agencies allowed to commit inhumane acts of terror due to incompetence. Johnny Bravo at John Bushell.
Again, this young man who's just supposed to be spontaneously moving into this, you can tell by listening to him, he's very well scripted. He's being given things. If you look at a couple of his interviews, it looks like he's reading from a teleprompter or something like that, which would take away the idea that this is just organic and he's just speaking right from the heart. So of course it would beg the question is who's behind this, who is, you know, who's giving him the information, who's putting up to do this. And when you find out his father's a former FBI agent, he's a retired FBI agent. Now here's some of the problems with this whole scenario. The first thing, like I said, you know, they want new legislation, they want new laws, they want us. And as I show you how they supposedly dropped the ball so many times, and I'm using air quotes because that's up for question. If they drop the ball so many times, why now do they turn around and say, we want to take your guns away so that we can protect you? And if they couldn't even stop this from happening, and this was this could have very easily been avoided, and I'm going to show you how, then why is it that they want you all of a sudden to say, well, yeah, we trust you here. We'll give up all of our weapons, all of our ability that's given to us by the Constitution to protect ourselves. We'll give it all up so that, you know, you guys can protect us, right? So the first thing is the FBI was contacted more than once regarding the fear that this gentleman was a threat, yet they never went and investigated any further. The FBI was made aware of this young man, that there was a problem with him, yet they never went and investigated him, right? So that's one of the first things that could have happened. If they wouldn't have investigated him, then they could have put an end to this. They could have stopped it before it ever happened. They could have nipped it in the bud. Now this is a New York Times article, and the New York Times article. Now what I read about David Hogg before, about his father being an FBI agent, like I said, I just want to qualify my sources so that you don't think I'm just making these things up. The CNN talked about how his father was a retired FBI agent, right? So the New York Times has this article. It says, tipsters warning to FBI on the Florida shooting suspect. And this was in February 23rd, New York Times. Richard A. Opel Jr., Serge Kovaleski, Patricia Mazzei, and Adam Goldman. The warnings that law enforcement officials received about Nicholas Cruz, who was the alleged shooter, were anything but subtle. It says, I know he's going to explode, a woman who knew Cruz said on the FBI's tip line on January the 5th. Now, keep in mind, this occurred February the 14th. So on January 5th, they called the FBI and they left a message in the tip line and said, I know he's going to explode. Her big worry was that he might resort to slipping into a school and just shooting the place up. This was on the tip line at the FBI. 40 days later, of course, Mr. Cruz is accused of doing just that. 3 months before the February 14th massacre at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, a family friend dialed 911 to tell the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office about Mr. Cruz's personal arsenal. I need someone here because I'm afraid he comes back and he has a lot of weapons. The friend said Mr. Cruz, 19, himself called the authorities just after Thanksgiving, describing how he had been in a fight and was struggling with the death of his mother. So he called the authorities himself. And it says here he called on he called the authorities just after Thanksgiving, describing how he had been in a fight and was struggling with the death of his mother. 3/26/2018, tipsters warning FBI in Florida shooting. I know he's going to explode, and we shared that one. No, this is the article. I'm sorry, the article was on March 26th. No, the article was January the 5th. They called the FBI, and just right after Thanksgiving, Cruz himself called and said he was struggling with the death of his mother. This New York Times article, Cruz says, I lost my mother a couple of weeks ago, so like I'm dealing with a bunch of things right now, he said in a childlike voice, sounding agitated and out of breath. The authorities have acknowledged mishandling numerous warning signs that Mr. Cruz was deeply troubled. There were tips to the FBI about disturbing social media posts. There were visits by social services to his home. There were dozens of calls to 911 and local authorities, some mentioning fears that he was capable of violence. And here's another article in CNN. It says the local sheriff's department had been called to the home. It says 39 times, but yet the sheriff's department tried to say it was only 23 times. But even if it's 23 times, They have been called repeatedly about this young man. They visited the home. And this article says, public records have emerged that conflict with the Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel's statements about the number of times deputies were dispatched to the shooter's home. Records obtained from the sheriff's office by CNN show that the law enforcement agency received at least 45 calls for service relating to Cruz or his brother from 2008 to 2017. It says they received 45 calls from 2008 to 2017 about Cruz or his brother. Before the attack at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on February 14th, the sheriff's office has insisted it received no more than 23 calls. Even if it's 23 calls, that's still a lot of calls. CNN has repeatedly asked the sheriff's office to explain the discrepancy, sending emails and attempting to reach an agency representative by phone. The agency has not responded to these requests with an explanation. So again, these are all red flags that something is amiss, that something's not right. So just think about this: 45 calls or 23 calls within a few years about him or his brother. The gentleman calls himself and said he's struggling with the death of his mother. People are calling the FBI and calling, he got kicked out of school for fighting. All these are red flags that were ignored by the very law enforcement people that now are saying to you that they want you to trust them with protecting you. If you know also that they actually had a school security officer who was also I think he was either a sheriff's deputy or a former sheriff's deputy, that he was at the school, and what they said is the whole event took 6 minutes. He waited 4 minutes before he even went into the school. He was outside. Excuse me. He was outside of the school with his firearm and didn't go into the school for 4 minutes. And at that time, a lot of damage was done. And then the adjacent sheriff's department came over, and they found 3 other sheriff's deputies from Broward County that were outside of the school and didn't go in. They had their guns drawn and everything, but they never went in. So think about all these opportunities that could have happened in order to stop this occurrence or to lessen the severity of it, and they were all ignored by the people that want to protect you, and they want you to give up your ability to protect yourself. So let's look at some clips about how they dropped the ball, and then we'll share some more.
Joining me now, Republican Florida State Representative. He's calling for his resignation. He is Matt Caldwell. Why are you calling for his resignation?
There's just a clear failure here, Liz. Look, it's not just that the SRO didn't respond that was on campus. Then we find out 3 other deputies respond, but they don't go in. Then we find out what you just said, that not only is it more than 24 calls that they've reported, but maybe twice as many calls to the House over the past several years. It's not just about Mr. Cruz and the failures that happened here. What else don't we know about? We keep getting reports from Broward and Dade County right now coming up to the legislature that there's actually a bigger problem, that the sheriff's office and the school district haven't been arresting teenagers who are committing real crimes because they're trying to game the numbers on statistics for funding pieces.
Well, sir, stay on that.
This is really scary.
This is a really important issue you just brought up, and I'm so grateful for you, because all school districts across the country have to pay attention to what we're now going to discuss. It's called the DPI program in Broward County. It's where the local sheriff's office works with the school district about not putting teenagers in the prison system, getting them therapy or counseling in order to reduce the arrest rates and the prison sentences that are handed out. Because you're saying that what you're hearing is that the problems in Broward County could be deeper than we know. I mean, every day that goes by, we hear something that sounds like it just gets worse and worse.
Okay, now I want to also share with you some connections. Like I said, we understand the strategy. We understand it's the globalists. We see all of the red flags, all of the very interesting occurrences, if you will, regarding this. Now let's understand why the narrative is being pushed, because there's always been a connection between mainstream media and the globalist agenda, the globalist own mainstream media, and many of the people that work for mainstream media are actually assets to various agencies that are complicit to this overall conspiracy. So you may or may not have heard of Operation Mockingbird if you've ever seen some of my other videos. And again, I just encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and please my Patreon as well. The Operation Mockingbird was a large-scale program of the United States CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, that began in the early 1950s and attempted to manipulate news media for propaganda purposes. It funded student and cultural organizations and magazines as front organizations. According to writer Deborah Davis, Operation Mockingbird recruited leading American journalists into a propaganda network and oversaw the operations of front groups. CIA support of front groups was exposed after a 1967 Ramparts magazine article reported that the National Student Association received funding from the CIA. In the 1970s, congressional investigations and reports also revealed agency connections with journalists and civic groups. None of these reports, however, mentions an Operation Mockingbird coordinating or supporting these activities. So they did a congressional investigation, and declassified documents proved that the CIA was very much interconnected with the news organizations.
But for today, what I think I want to get across that's most important is that you have been subject to something called Project Mockingbird for as long as you've been alive. Unless you're 70 or 80 or 90 years old, that is. But the rest of us. And what does it do? It's like putting you inside of a movie. What do I mean? I mean that almost everything that comes from almost every organization that you've counted on to bring you information is controlled by the central governments, powerful NGOs, and intelligence agencies. And as borders are fading away in this globalist world, the writers working on the narrative of your life, well, they come from all over. And they have all manner of goals and angles that they're trying to get you to buy into. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is proven fact. And it's been proven a long time. I know what you might be thinking. If this is so important, if this was so dire, why haven't I heard about it before? Well, what did I just tell you? You won't hear about it because the people who are going to tell you about it are bought and paid for. Some of whom, many of whom, are actually intelligence assets. If this is completely new information to you, I imagine you want some proof. Well, here you go.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to the national news services, AP and UPI?
Well, again, I think we're getting into the kind of detail, Mr. Chairman, that I'd prefer to handle in executive session.
Well, it made almost no headlines, and yet a major piece of legislation was quietly signed into law a little over a week ago. President Obama quietly signed into law the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. So often there are additional laws and spending bills tucked into the NDAA, and this year was no exception. This time, it was something called the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act of 2016. That bipartisan bill will establish an interagency center housed at the State Department to coordinate and synchronize counter-propaganda efforts throughout the U.S. government. The bill also creates a grant program for NGOs, for think tanks, civil society, and other experts outside government who are, quote, engaged in counter-propaganda related work. Now let's be clear, this is being sold as countering propaganda, but how do you do that? After all, if government agencies put out information to the public for the sake of altering a point of view, isn't that the very definition of propaganda? So this law essentially funds U.S. propaganda, but isn't that illegal? It was, but no, not anymore, because 3 years ago, wrapped inside the 2013 NDAA, was an amendment that removed the ban on the U.S. government creating propaganda and then showing it to U.S. citizens. But there's a reason it was illegal for over 60 years for our government to propagandize the public, to protect the public from our own government.
There's lots more out there, and I could probably do a 3-hour video for you proving it by showing you stories where the CIA or other agencies have been caught red-handed lying. There's some really good video about it out there. In fact, that's the point of this exercise. That's what #FollowTheWhiteRabbit is. You can't be told. It's no good for anyone out here to tell you this stuff. You have to go and look. With improving technology, it's gotten a lot easier for them to do this. And at this point, they're manipulating Google results. So even if you go and look now at the stuff I'm trying to tell you, you're going to be inundated with results that debunk this theory. But I've just shown you the Senate testimony from the CIA. You have to dig deeper. You have to look in those places that the mainstream media, the mockingbird media, has told you not to look. You can't be such suckers. You can't fall for this line that any newspaper covering a different version of the story is secretly racist and sexist and, quote, alt-right. Don't fall for it. Are you really that easily led? Are you really that gullible? Open your eyes. They've been doing it a long time, like I said. And here in the background, as I've been talking, this is a CNN story from the first Gulf War, I believe it was. Look how terrible it is. This looks like a Saturday Night Live sketch, doesn't it? Feast your eyes. I'll let it play for a bit.
CD, if you need to take cover, I notice that you've got your gas mask in your hands. If you need to put it on, please do so. If you need to take cover, please do so. If you are able...
We are now led to understand that there are also firings in another city in Saudi Arabia. CNN's Carl Rochelle is here with me. He just came up. Carl, I know we can't be very specific given these restrictions, but within those parameters, what did you see?
Well, what I saw, I didn't see anything hit. I looked almost straight above us. There is a vapor trail coming from my right to my left, and there's a cloud of something. It looks like it might have been an explosion, a cloud. I'd say...
Oh my God, how corny does that look? And look at it. This was run on television. This is the level of fakeness that we believed. So think of the level of fakeness they're capable of today. 20-something years on, they're tricking you. And this is not the only example. It's just the example I picked because I think it's particularly funny. Just go and look. That's all Follow the White Rabbit is. It's trying to get through to people who refuse to believe this stuff, who are too scared and disturbed to believe this stuff. But you have to let yourself, because history is in the making right now. This is a very significant period of history.
Now, they also have a very big influence in Hollywood and television, as also along with news organizations. And so a lot of the news that you're hearing that is being reported, you have to examine it with that in mind to understand that the globalists, who CIA is the intelligence arm of the globalists, also known as the Illuminati, that they are actually helping to promote this agenda, and they use mainstream media. Now, I'm going to show you some clips because, like I said, some people may say, well, I don't know if that's true. It's a fact. It's not, you know, like the old people say now, facts. This is facts. This is not something I'm coming up with. This is documented. They've acknowledged this fact, but they don't talk about it a lot because, of course, they want to keep you manipulated to think that all these things are just happening spontaneously or happening by coincidence. The NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act, and that's been, there's many variations of it, but the one specifically I want to talk to you about is the one that President Obama signed. So the newest version of the NDAA, this is a 2012 article, includes in an amendment that would legalize the use of propaganda on the American public. So President Obama signed this in 2011. I think it became officially became law in 2012. So Michael Hastings of BuzzFeed reports the amendment proposed by Mac Thornberry, who's a Republican from Texas, and Adam Smith, a Democrat from Washington, and passed in the White House last Friday, and this is 2012, would effectively nullify the Smith-Munn Act of 1948, which explicitly forbids information and psychological operations aimed at influencing U.S. public opinion. Thornberry said that current law ties the hands of Americans, diplomatic officials, military, and others by inhibiting our ability to effectively communicate in a credible way. Now let me explain that one to you. Let me break that one down for you. So up until that point, American intelligence agencies, the CIA especially, was able to use propaganda in order to promote their agenda overseas. So we've spent a lot of money and a lot of resources using propaganda in other countries to promote the U.S.'s position. So what this law did, because it was illegal up until this point, the Smith-Munn Act. The Smith-Munn Act of 1948 forbid them to use propaganda against, in the U.S. or against U.S. or towards U.S. citizens. But this made it okay, so they can use propaganda. And for those who may not know what propaganda is when you frame a narrative and you present it to people to push your agenda. So the difference in propaganda and news reporting, a news reporter is not supposed to editorialize. A news reporter is not supposed to editorialize. If I'm a news reporter or a journalist, I'm supposed to report the facts. I'm not supposed to give my opinions. I'm not supposed to try to sway you one way or another. I'm supposed to simply state the facts. And so if someone got shot, right, and I'm reporting that, I would say it is alleged that a young male walked into the house and shot 2 people, period. I shouldn't say it's a heinous crime. I shouldn't say that it's a tragedy that this happened. I should simply state the facts. If I wanted to, and here's case in point, in case you don't recognize it. With President Trump, there's a lot of anti-Trump propaganda. What do I mean by this? Because when they are reporting things that President Trump says, they are using descriptive words in order to frame your thought process. So I heard them say, President Trump tweeted XYZ, but with absolutely no evidence. His Twitter fingers were going and he was doing this and that, right? So I think it was the Las Vegas shooting. And President Trump made a statement about it, and they said President Trump shared this with no evidence, with absolutely no evidence. So when they say with no evidence, what they're doing is they are attacking the credibility of what President Trump said. Journalists or reporters not supposed to do that. They're supposed to just report the facts. An editorial columnist or someone like that can editorialize and give you their opinion, but they have to let you know that they're giving you their opinion. What does that mean? If I say, in my estimation, or how I look at it is this, because that's what I'm doing. I'm editorializing this information. I'm giving you the facts. I'm giving you the research that I did, and I'm editorializing it because I'm giving you my interpretation of them as well, right? But I'm giving it based on facts. And I'm using the words of the people that I'm referring to and the documentation, the news reports, and all this other stuff. So if I'm reporting what somebody says, then I need to report what they say. If I'm saying that someone was accused of something, I need to say, this person allegedly shot the person. Now I can say, but I really believe that they did it. That's my opinion. So what happens is with this NDAA, with propaganda, they're not just giving you facts. What they're doing is they are shaping your opinion about something. And how it became very popular is in World War II, the Nazis perfected propaganda in order to get the Germans to go into war. And then the Western world, the British and the Americans, also began to use propaganda to get support from the American people for them to go to war. And so that's when they really started these false flags and these what they call psychological operations in order to get people's opinion in a certain direction so that they can push their agenda. So for instance, whenever they wanted to attack a world leader like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Manuel Noriega, what they would do initially is they would begin a propaganda campaign against them. So whenever we were going into Iraq, they wanted to tell you what a horrible guy Saddam Hussein is, and he's terrible. He has weapons of mass destruction. They call him the axis of evil. With Gaddafi, they said, oh, he's a horrible guy, and he's terrible, and he's destroying his country, and his people aren't. So they paint that picture to sway your opinion so that when they go in and attack or overthrow these governments, then people aren't upset about it because they're saying, well, they overthrew a dictator. And then they're ignoring the fact that a lot of these are illegal. You know, if it's another country by international law, you're not allowed to just go in and to take over another country unless unless it's an act of war. And the only way we can go to war is we have to go to Congress, and the Congress has to declare war, right? So a president is not supposed to unilaterally be able to go in and just do, unless it's an emergency and they have to do something right then. But as far as declaring war, that has to be that's supposed to be an act of Congress. So anyway, this propaganda campaign that they use now, what they do is they paint the picture, they do the narrative, and they're allowed to use the media to sway public opinion. Now, I'm going to talk about some specific people. So the one I'm going to talk about, CNN, and if you know Anderson Cooper, and I always tie in the globalists, the Illuminati, and some of the specific families that are involved with it. So you may have heard of the Vanderbilt family. The Vanderbilt family is a very wealthy family, and they gained wealth in the railroad industry like in the 17 and 1800s. Cornelius Vanderbilt is like the patriarch of the family, and so they've been very wealthy. And Gloria Vanderbilt is an heir of the Vanderbilt estate. She's worth estimated $200 million. Back in the days when I was growing up, Vanderbilt jeans were very popular. And so Gloria Vanderbilt is the heir of the Vanderbilt family, which is one of the ruling elite families. She has a son by the name of Anderson Cooper, who was one of the mainstays on CNN. Anderson Cooper went to Yale, I believe it was, and after college he worked for the CIA. He says that he was an intern for 2 summers with the CIA, but he got trained by the CIA. Now why would you, if you go to college, why would you work for the CIA and then become a reporter? So it begs the question why that would be, but ultimately it also plays into the whole narrative that the CIA is still manipulating mainstream media behind the scenes. Here's some more speculation. And again, I did some research and I saw several sources that reported this, but it also makes sense. If you know, recently Facebook got into trouble because they were collecting people's data. Right? It's also been reported that the CIA and other intelligence agencies use Facebook, and some people have even speculated that Facebook was created by the CIA in order to gather data on people, right? And also to sway public opinion. And so when you hear all the controversies and things coming out about Facebook, it would line up with that philosophy or that belief that that's what they're doing with Facebook. So it's been rumored that Mark Zuckerberg is the grandson of David Rockefeller. Mark Zuckerberg's real name is Jacob Greenberg, and he's also the grandson of Hank Greenberg. Now, again, this is what's reported. I don't know this to be a fact, but it all kind of lines up together, but I want to share this information with you. And it says here that the Rothschilds own 8% of Facebook shares, and the hidden agenda of Facebook's social network is to aid the growth of the police state and the one world government movement. According to Tapblog, the venture Facebook was funded with a $500 million loan from the CIA-owned bank. So Facebook was started with a $500 million loan from a CIA-owned bank. And also Google is reported to be an arm of the Central Intelligence Agency, or the intelligence community. And it says the adopted name Zuckerberg means Sugar Mountain. And so I wanted to share those with you. I want you to be informed and educated. I want us to look beyond the narratives that we're giving you, because I do believe strongly that The people that are giving us these narratives have a agenda behind it. When I went to college and I was a communications major and I had journalism classes, and one of the things that they said in journalism was that anytime you have a source, you need to qualify your source, which means you have to know who it is that's giving you the information, if there's any motivation behind it. You know, for instance, and I always use this for an example, if somebody's giving you information, if I go to the Chevrolet dealer and the Chevrolet dealer comes out and he starts telling me how great Chevrolet cars are, then I understand his motivation is to sell Chevrolet cars and he works for Chevrolet. If I went to an independent broker who has a million different cars that they work with and I ask them their opinion and they go, well, in my estimation, the Chevrolet is the best car, then I should evaluate that information at a different level because his motivation is different than the other guy, right? When we have these media sources that we're listening to, if these people are just media reporters and they're just giving us information, then that is what it should be. But they are pretending, or they are putting up the appearance that they're simply reporting the news. But when you find out behind the scenes that they're pushing an agenda, which is why 90% of the mainstream media all are anti-Trumpers. And when you understand that the people, the globalists that own mainstream media, 90% of mainstream media is owned by 6 globalist corporations, multinational corporations, and that their agenda ultimately is for a new world order, then that should give you a different way to look at the information. If we already know that they're trying to get rid of the Second Amendment, and then you see these occurrences happening just like it happened in Florida, or just like Sandy Hook, or all these different places, these things happen, and then when the story comes out, you hear all these discrepancies, all these things that should have, could have, would have happened. And then it would make sense that they're allowing these things to happen, or someone's orchestrating these events behind the scenes in order to get their one world governmental plan in place. And again, the final word on this is that if all these organizations drop the ball, the Broward County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, the local police, and if all these people that are obligated to protect us, if they all let this slip through the cracks, and not just once, but many, many times, as you heard, that the Sheriff's Department, they said 23 times, but the investigators or the people that investigated this said 45 times in 9 years that they were called to the house for this gentleman or his brother. He got kicked out of school reportedly because of fighting and violence, and the neighbors are calling and saying this guy is a loose cannon, he's going to lose it. So if all that was out there and that they didn't do anything about it, then either it was intentional or incompetence, one or the other. It's either intentional or incompetence. Now, if it's intentional, then of course we're going to evaluate this. We need to expose it, and the people that are behind this need to be brought to justice. If it is incompetence, then again, then I shouldn't trust them with trying to protect me or my children, and we have to put other measures in place. There was actually a security officer at the school who refused to go in. There were actually, it was reported, 3 sheriff's deputies that were outside. It was also reported that they were running drills in that same school earlier, which if you hear about a lot of occurrences that has happened before, that reportedly there will be an active shooter drill or some kind of drill that's in the area, and some of the students even said that they thought that the drill was still going on. And so it's a lot of questions involved in this. I just pray that you don't jump to conclusions, and that you have an open mind and open ears to find out what's going on. You know, what the Bible says at the end of the day is that there is going to be a one world governmental system that is run by what is called the Antichrist, and that in order for him to gain power, he will compel and convince the citizens of the world to trust him and to give up their individual rights and allow him to be in charge of their lives. And the Bible says when they yell peace and safety, sudden destruction is upon them. We put our trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings, and we know that he's going to protect us, and so we shouldn't fall victim to the schemes and the strategies of the enemy. This has been Pastor Joe Green. Till next time, peace and blessings to you. Shalom. I love you. Bye-bye.
Let's talk now about propaganda, the program by governments to manipulate people's thoughts and opinions. Right now, the use of propaganda by the U.S. government is only allowed when it's used in other countries. The Pentagon actually spends about $4 billion a year to sway public opinion in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Evidence that it can be a lucrative weapon when fighting a war, especially when part of that war is an information war. Well, now the U.S. government wants to be able to use propaganda on its own people. This provision is buried deep within the $642 billion defense bill and would give the government overarching power to push television, radio, print, and social media onto the U.S. public. But why? Well, I'm joined now by Lucy Steigerwald, Associate Editor for Reason Magazine. And Lucy, we should mention this was actually a bipartisan effort. This was Texas Republican Mac Thornberry, Washington Democrat Adam Smith who put this together. Why on earth should the government be able to use propaganda?
Well, I mean, every awful piece of legislation is invariably bipartisan. It's kind of disappointing because Smith is the one who also helped Congressman Amash try to stop indefinite detainment, which is also the awful part of the NDAA. I mean, propaganda, you know, government is like anything else. They're trying to tell us what a good job they're doing, and, you know, it works to some extent.
Well, I mean, to what extent, though? Because if the Pentagon is spending $4 billion a year just on, you know, their propaganda effort, has it, you know, captured the hearts and minds of people in Afghanistan? Because that's not what I usually hear is going on in those countries that we've invaded. Where is this propaganda that we spend so much money on working?
That's a good question. I mean, abroad, in places where the U.S. actually came in with an army, I mean, I'm going to say that's going to be more compelling than mere words or posters or anything like that. If you see troops in your home, you know, that's going to be more convincing. I would think, at least.
Unless they're bringing you cookies, right?
Even cookies.
You know, the bill's supporters say a couple of things, say that this is needed for a few reasons. One of the reasons is the material is just too good. The material that's being used abroad is just too good not to be used here. And they're also saying, that new techniques are needed to help fight al-Qaeda, which is, as we all know, a borderless enemy whose own propaganda reaches Americans. Talk a little bit about these reasons given for why this is a good thing.
Well, I mean, first, I don't think this is a good thing, but sort of to be a devil's advocate and to refer to some other opinions on this that I've read, some people might say that the U.S. should get a taste of what is happening in other countries. So it's sort of a way to bring wars home and bring home what U.S. policy is doing to other people. And maybe if we saw it, we might object more strongly.
But we're not talking about letting, you know, Iraqi propaganda in here. We're talking about U.S. propaganda on U.S. citizens. Well, why do you think it's bad? I guess let's get to the bottom of it.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I mean, propaganda from government, you're being sold a product that you were forced to buy already. And, you know, you and I are paying for it, and it doesn't matter if we object to all of it or some of it. It's sort of adding insult to injury. And in the past, it has worked. I mean, the U.S., we have our First Amendment and all, but it has a history of active propaganda from government. Most blatantly, World War I mean, they had the Office of Censorship. They didn't shield anything. World War II, same restrictions. I mean, it's better now, but you still have the Office of Drug Control Policy. You still have, you know, there's propaganda now still. And during Iraq and the lead up to that, there was, you know, a much more subtle type of propaganda. And maybe it's better even to have posters that say, fight the Hun, you know, just very like the kitschy propaganda, than to have, you know, State Department people on fake social networking and some of the controversies. It's been a while, but with Iraq and journalists selling the Bush line, I mean...
The weapons of mass destruction.
Sure, yeah.
I guess that, to an extent, was propaganda because it wasn't real and it was a message that they wanted to get people on board with.
And it was more underhand. It was more hard to spot then, you know. I mean, I guess you'd like to think that people are more sophisticated now than they were when the, you know, Belgian babies on bayonets type thing. But I don't know. I mean,
well, it's tough, too, because we have Citizens United. So Citizens United says that corporations have the same right to speak and spend money on the same thing that people do. It's hard to say that the government shouldn't have those rights, too, based on the fact that that's now the law of the land, according to the Supreme Court. So you know, I see that argument in terms of what is law, whether we like it or not. But let's talk more broadly, Lucy, about what's in these defense authorization bills. I mean, this was put in there along with, you know, more indefinite detention, along with prohibition of gay marriage at military installations. A lot of stuff. When you have a bill that's this thick, our lawmakers seem to put in a lot of stuff in there.
Yes, they do.
They're just trying to get it passed, like pull a fast one on the Americans?
Yes. I mean, I have talked to people who work in offices that, you know, off the record type thing, but they sort of admit people aren't reading bills. I mean, and that at its core,
even people who vote on the bills,
they don't know what's. I mean, they don't know what's in them, and there are these tiny debates. Like, if you heard about the trespass bill, that was a recent controversy, and there are, you know, these minor word changes, and there's, or with indefinite detainment. Let's go back to that. You know, there was the question: can Americans be detained or not? And fundamentally, like, if that's a question, if people who are even voting on it and deciding on it don't even know, I mean, that's fundamentally a problem in itself.
However, even if they would have read the bill, it's kind of vague in the bill. That's another kind of tactic that's used, is using as vague language as possible. Mm-hmm. Well, really interesting stuff. We think it's important to bring this out here and to talk about it and make sure at least people know that this is what their taxpayer dollars are going to, and to beware for the billboards and the you know, Facebook ads popping up that could be encouraging people to support their government. It's very interesting. Lucy Steigerwald, Associate Editor for Reason Magazine. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to introduce a very simple piece of legislation to repeal the infamous Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, quietly signed into law by the President on New Year's Day. What a way to usher in the new year. Section 1021 essentially codifies into law the very dubious claim of presidential authority under 2001 authorization for the use of military force to indefinitely detain American citizens without access to legal representation or due process of law. Section 1021 provides for the possibility of the U.S. military acting as a kind of police force on U.S. soil, apprehending terror suspects, including Americans, and whisking them off to an undisclosed location indefinitely. No right to attorney, no right to trial, no day in court. This is precisely the kind of egregious distortion of justice that Americans have always ridiculed in so many dictatorships overseas. A great man named Solzhenitsyn became the hero of so many of us when he exposed the Soviet Union's extensive Gulag system. Is this really the kind of a United States we want to create in name of fighting terrorism? Some have argued that nothing in Section 1021 explicitly mandates holding Americans without trial, but it employs vague language, radically expanding the detention authority to include anyone who has substantially supported certain terrorist groups or associated forces. No one has defined what those terms mean. What is an associated force? Sadly, too many of my colleagues are too willing to undermine our Constitution to support such outrageous legislation. One senator even said about American citizens being picked up under this section of the NDAA, quote, "When they say, I want a lawyer, you tell them, shut up. You don't get a lawyer," close quote. Is this acceptable in someone who has taken an oath to uphold the Constitution? Mr. Speaker, Of course, I recognize how critical it is that we identify and apprehend those who are suspected of plotting attacks against Americans. But why do we have so little faith in our judicial system? Have we not tried in civilian court and won convictions of hundreds of individuals for terrorist or related activities? I fully support continuing to do so. But let us not abandon what is so unique and special about our system of government in the process. I hope my colleagues will join my effort to overturn this shameful Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes.
Mr. President, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, warned, "The means of defense against foreign danger historically have become instruments of tyranny at home." Abraham Lincoln had similar thoughts, saying, "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." During war, there has always been a struggle to preserve constitutional liberties. During the Civil War, the right of habeas corpus was suspended. Newspapers were closed down. Fortunately, these rights were restored after the war. The discussion now is to suspend certain rights of due process is especially worrisome, given that we are engaged in a war that appears to have no end. Rights given up now cannot expected to return. So we do well to contemplate the diminishment of due process, knowing that these rights that we give up now may never be restored. My well-intentioned colleagues' admonitions in defending provisions of this defense bill say that we should give up certain rights, the right to due process. Their legislation would arm the military with the authority to detain indefinitely, without due process or trial, people suspected of an association with terrorism. These would include American citizens apprehended on American soil. I want to repeat that. We are talking about people who are merely suspected of terrorism or suspected of committing a crime and have been judged by no court. We are talking about American citizens that could be taken from the United States and sent to a camp at Guantanamo Bay and held indefinitely. This should be alarming to everyone watching this proceeding today, because it puts every single American citizen at risk. There is one thing and one thing only that is protecting American citizens, and that's our Constitution, the checks we put on government power. Should we err today and remove some of the most important checks on state power in the name of fighting terrorism, well, then the terrorists have won. Detaining citizens without a court trial is not American. In fact, this is an alarming, arbitrary power that is reminiscent of what Egypt did with its permanent emergency law. This permanent emergency law allowed them to detain their own citizens without a court trial. Egyptians became so alarmed at that in the last spring that they overthrew their government. Recently, Justice Scalia affirmed this idea in his dissent in the Hamdi case, saying, "Where the government accuses a citizen of waging war against it, our constitutional tradition has been to prosecute him in federal court for treason or another crime." Scalia concluded by saying, "The very core of liberty secured by our Anglo-Saxon system of separated powers has been freedom from indefinite imprisonment at the will of the executive." Justice Scalia was, as he often does, following the wisdom of our founding fathers. As Franklin wisely warned, those who give up their liberty for security may wind up with neither. And really, what security does this indefinite detention of Americans give us? The first and flawed premise, both here and in the badly misnamed Patriot Act, is that our pre-9/11 police powers were insufficient to stop terrorism. This is simply not borne out by the facts. Congress long ago made it a crime to provide or conspire to provide material assistance to al-Qaeda or other foreign terrorist organizations. Material assistance includes virtually anything of value: legal, political advice, education, books, newspapers, lodging, or otherwise. The Supreme Court sustained the constitutionality of this sweeping prohibition. We have laws on the books that can prosecute terrorists before they commit acts of terrorism. Al-Qaeda adherents may be detained, prosecuted, and convicted for conspiring to violate the material assistance prohibition. In fact, we've already done this. Jose Padilla, for instance, was convicted and sentenced to 17 years in prison for conspiring to provide material assistance to Al-Qaeda. The criminal law does require and can prevent crimes from occurring before they do occur. Indeed, conspiracy laws and prosecutions in civilian courts have been routinely invoked after 9/11 to thwart embryonic international terrorism. In fact, from the Bush administration, Michael Chertoff, then head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division and later Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, testified shortly after 9/11. He underscored the history of this government in prosecuting terrorists in domestic courts has been one of unmitigated success, and one in which the judges have done a superb job of managing the courtroom and not compromising our concerns about security and our concern about classified information. We can prosecute terrorists in our courts and have done so. It's the wonderful thing about our country is that even the most despicable criminal, murderer, rapist, terrorist, our court systems do work. We can have constitutional liberty and prosecute terrorists. There is no evidence that the criminal justice procedures have frustrated intelligence collection about international terrorism. Suspected terrorists have repeatedly waived both the right to an attorney and the right to silence. Additionally, Miranda warnings are not required at all when the purpose of the interrogation is public safety. The authors of this bill errantly maintain that the bill would not enlarge the universe of detainees, people held indefinitely. I believe this is simply not the case. The current authorization for the use of military force confines the universe to persons implicated in 9/11 or who harbored those who were. This new detainee provision will expand the universe to include any person said to be part of or substantially supportive of Al-Qaeda or Taliban. But remember, this is not someone who's been concluded at trial to be part of Al-Qaeda. This is someone who is suspected. If you are a suspect in our country, you are usually accorded due process. You go to court, you're not automatically guilty. You're accused of a crime. But we're saying someone accused of a crime could be taken from America's soil. An American citizen accused of a crime, a suspect of a crime, could be taken to Guantanamo Bay. These terms are dangerously vague. More than a decade after 9/11, the military has been unable to define the earmarks of membership in or affiliation to either Al-Qaeda or other terrorist organizations. It's an accusation and sometimes difficult to prove. Some say that to prevent another 9/11 attack, we must fight terrorism with a war mentality and not treat potential attackers as criminals. For combatants captured on the battlefield, I agree. But these are people captured or detained in America, American citizens. 9/11 didn't succeed because we granted terrorists due process. In fact, 9/11 did not succeed because Al-Qaeda was so formidable, but because of human error. The Defense Department withheld intelligence from the FBI. No warrants were denied. The warrants weren't even requested. The FBI failed to act on repeated pleas from its field agents who were in possession of a laptop that may well have had information that might have prevented 9/11. But no judge ever turned down a warrant. Our criminal system didn't fail. No one ever asked for a warrant to look at Moussawi's computer in August, a month before 9/11. These are not failures of our laws. These are not failures of our Constitution. These are not reasons we should scrap our Constitution and simply send people accused of terrorism to Guantanamo Bay, American citizens. These are failures of imperfect men and women in bloated bureaucracies. No amount of liberty sacrificed at the altar of the state will ever change that. A full accounting of our human failures by 9/11 Commission has proven that enhanced cooperation between law enforcement and the intelligence community, not military action or not giving up our liberty at home, is the key to thwarting international terrorism. We should not have to sacrifice our liberty to be safe. We cannot allow the rules to change to fit the whims of those in power. The rules, the binding chains of the Constitution were written so that it didn't matter who was in power. In fact, they were written to protect us and our rights from those who hold power with good intentions. We are not governed by saints or angels. Occasionally we will elect people, and there have been times in history when those who come into power are not angels. That's why we have laws and rules that restrain what the government can do. That's why we have laws that protect you and say you're innocent until proven guilty. That's why we have laws that say you should have a trial before a judge and a jury of your peers before you're sent off to some prison indefinitely. Finally, the detainee provisions of the Defense Authorization Bill do another grave harm to freedom. They imply perpetual war for the first time in the history of the United States. No benchmarks are established that would ever terminate the conflict with al-Qaeda, Taliban, or other foreign terrorist organizations. In fact, this bill explicitly says that no part of this bill is to imply any restriction on the authorization of force. When will the wars ever end? When will these provisions end? No congressional view is allowed or imagined. No victory is defined. No peace is possible if victory is made impossible by definition. To disavow the idea that the exclusive congressional power to declare war somehow allows the president to continue war forever at whim, I will offer an amendment to this bill that will deauthorize the war in Iraq. We're bringing the troops home in January. Is there any reason why we should have an open-ended commitment to war in Iraq when the war is ending? If we need to go to war in Iraq again, we should debate on it and vote on it. It's an important enough matter that we should not have an open-ended commitment to war in Iraq. The use of military force must begin in Congress. Our founding fathers separated those powers and said that Congress has the power to declare war, and it's a precious and important power. We shouldn't give that up to the president.